You think you know the story. A poor boy, a handful of beans, and a beanstalk that rises into the clouds. It's a tale we hear so young that we rarely question it. But what if I told you that Jack and the Beanstalk is older than any children's book, older than medieval England, older even than writing itself? What if beneath this simple fairy tale lies a story thousands of years old? One that speaks of giants, forgotten gods, and something far darker than anything we were told as children. Before we climb into the deeper truth behind this ancient tale, take a moment to subscribe and tap the like button. It helps us explore more hidden histories and legends that time tried to bury. Now, the version you know is only the surface, a polished, softened, harmless retelling shaped for nursery rooms and picture books. But the deeper you look, the more familiar tale begins to shift. Those magic beans, that impossible stalk, the castle in the clouds, none of it was meant to be whimsical. To earlier storytellers, these were symbols with power, clues, fragments of a worldview far older than England, carried from one generation to the next by memory alone. Some folklorists believe Jack and the Beanstalk is not truly a children's story at all, but a cultural fossil, a myth from deep prehistory, wrapped in new clothing every time it changed hands. And once you begin peeling back those layers, the story that emerges is not comforting, it's primal. It speaks of climbing the boundaries between worlds, of confronting ancient beings who ruled before humans ever settled the land, of stealing knowledge, wealth, and power from forces that once shaped the world. But to understand how far this story reaches, we must first return to where it begins, to the version we think we know, the one passed through bedtime stories, animated films, and storybooks, the one that seems clear and familiar until we start comparing it to its older forms. A lonely cottage, a mother and her only child, a desperate decision, and a handful of beans that were never meant to be planted in ordinary soil. This is the doorway into a myth older than civilization, and it all begins with Jack, the boy whose curiosity would break open the world. To understand where this tale truly comes from, we must return to its most familiar form, the story that generations have passed down, polished and reshaped over time, yet still echoing its ancient bones. Once upon a time, in a small, weather-beaten cottage on the edge of a forgotten village, lived a widow and her young son, Jack. Poverty clung to them like a heavy fog. Their pantry shelves were empty, their fields barren, and their last possession of value was a single cow, old, tired, but still capable of giving milk. When even that small comfort began to fade, Jack's mother made a painful decision. The cow must be sold, for without silver, they would not survive another season. So Jack set off toward the market, the cow's rope in his hand, hoping for enough coins to keep the two of them fed. But the world has a way of changing course in the most unexpected moments. On the old road, Jack encountered a strange man, a traveler whose clothing didn't match the local style, whose eyes held a glint of mischief or knowledge. No one could say for certain. Instead of offering coins, the stranger presented Jack with a trade. The cow for a handful of beans. Magic beans, he called them. A wiser boy might have refused. A more cautious one might have walked away, but Jack, guided by either fate, foolishness, or something tugging from beyond the ordinary world, agreed. And with that one choice, the familiar world cracked open. When Jack returned home, his mother's anger was swift and volcanic. She hurled the beans out the window and sent the boy to bed hungry, despair replacing hope. Yet during the night, something impossible happened. From the cold earth where the beans had landed, a stalk erupted, thick as a tree trunk and twisting upward with impossible strength. It rose through the darkness, piercing clouds that glowed faintly in the moonlight. It was as if the earth itself had grown a ladder into another realm, and Jack, driven by curiosity, desperation, or destiny, climbed. He climbed past the mist, past the thinning air, until the world below dissolved. At the top, he found a land unlike anything he'd ever known, a castle of stone in the sky, a place where the laws of the mortal world would no longer apply. This is the story we grew up with, but its roots grow far deeper than any beanstalk. The version of Jack and the Beanstalk that most of us recognize today, the boy, the beans, the climb, the giant, is surprisingly late in the timeline of this tale. By the time it appeared in printed form, it had already lived centuries in the shadow of oral storytelling. What we read in books today is not the origin story, but one of the most polished and tamed descendants. The earliest known appearances of Jack's tale in print comes from 1734 in a little London chapbook titled Jack Spriggins and the Enchanted Bean. But this version wasn't reverent or traditional. It was a satire, a comedic mockery of an already well-known folktale. The author ridiculed the very idea of beans growing into the heavens and laughed at the thought of castles floating above the clouds. That alone reveals something important. You cannot parody a story unless your audience already knows it. So, by the early 1700s, Jack and the Beanstalk must have been widespread. A tale told so frequently in households, inns, and village gatherings that printers assumed readers would immediately recognize it. But a few decades later, the tone changed. In 1807, a version called The History of Jack and the Beanstalk was published by Benjamin Tabbert. Unlike the parody, this retelling tried to correct the story in an effort to appeal to more refined sensibilities. Tabbert introduced a new character, a fairy, who reveals that the giant had murdered Jack's father and stolen his wealth. Suddenly, Jack wasn't a thief or a trickster anymore. He was a righteous hero reclaiming what was rightfully his. This reflected the morality of the Victorian era, when stories were often rewritten to teach clear lessons about duty, virtue, and justice. But this moral upgrade wasn't how earlier generations knew the tale. The most influential version came later, in 1890, when folklorist Joseph Jacobs included Jack and the Beanstalk in his collection English Fairy Tales. Jacobs gathered stories directly from oral sources, and he believed the telling he recorded, free from moralizing, free from added justification, represented the older, more authentic form of the tale. Jacob's Jack is not noble. He is not chosen by fate. He is simply clever, quick-witted, and lucky, a classic English trickster figure. But behind this trickster lies the faint outline of something older than any printed page, a myth shaping itself across centuries, still carrying echoes of a world long forgotten. There is one line in Jack and the Beanstalk that everyone remembers, a chant so iconic that it has echoed across centuries. Fee, fi, fo, fum. It's spoken in picture books, movies, cartoons, and bedtime stories, but few people realize just how old this strange chant truly is. It predates our modern versions of the tale by hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years. The earliest written appearance of the chant comes from Shakespeare's King Lear, written around early 1600s. In the play, a character recites, "Fee, fo, fum, I smell the blood of a British man." Even in Shakespeare's time, audiences would have instantly recognized the rhythm and the threat behind it. Writers of the era described this chant as a traditional giant's rhyme, something already ancient by the 17th century. But where did it come from? Some folklorists shrugged it off as nonsense syllables, a kind of guttural sound meant to mimic the heavy, rumbling voice of a monster. Others suggested it was simply a playful rhyme to frighten children around the hearth. But in the 19th century, Scottish antiquarian Charles Mackay proposed a far stranger theory, that the chant may have roots in Old Gaelic. According to him, fragments of the phrase resemble phrases meaning, "Behold food, enough to satisfy my hunger." If true, this would place the chant deep within the linguistic traditions of early Celtic storytelling, a possible ancestral memory of a people who spoke Gaelic long before England took shape. Whether or not Mackay's translation is perfect, it opens the door to a compelling idea that the Jack tale did not begin as a simple fairy story for children. It may have been part of a larger oral tradition, one that spoke of giants long before English language existed. Because giants are not unique to Jack's world, the idea of enormous beings, ancient, powerful, dangerous, is woven into the mythologies of civilizations across the globe. So when the giant roars his chant, it is more than just a threat. It is the echo of a very old belief system, one where giants were not simply monsters, but symbols of something larger, ancestral enemies, forgotten peoples, or primal forces that once shaped the world. To understand Jack's giant, we must look beyond England, into a landscape of myth that stretches across continents and civilizations. Long before Jack ever climbed his beanstalk, giants roamed the stories of nearly every ancient culture. They were not the clumsy, lumbering creatures we see in children's books. In their earliest forms, giants were primordial beings, embodiments of chaos, creation, or forgotten races pushed aside by the rise of humankind. Across civilizations, they appear again and again, always powerful, always ancient, and often representing forces much older than the societies that feared them. In the Hebrew Bible, the most famous giant is Goliath, a towering warrior struck down by a young shepherd David. But Goliath was only one among many. The Bible speaks of the Nephilim, mysterious giants born from the sons of God and the daughters of men. They were said to be mighty, terrifying, and older than the flood itself. In Greek mythology, giants were not merely big humans. They were cosmic forces. From the moment the gods rose to power, they faced the Gigantes, a race born from the blood of the sky god Uranus. The Gigantomachy, the war between gods and giants, became a foundational myth explaining how order triumphed over chaos. Meanwhile, in the ancient North, the Norse told stories of the Jotnar, an even older race than the gods themselves. The world, according to Norse myth, was literally formed from the body of a giant, Ymir. And throughout their lore, giants were not just enemies. They were teachers, lovers, rivals, and ancestors of the gods. Odin's deepest wisdom even comes from giant kind. Among the Celtic people, giants appear as the earliest inhabitants of the land, being like Balor, the one-eyed Fomorian, or Bendigeidfrun, Bran the Blessed, a giant king so vast he could wade across the Irish Sea. Many Celtic legends describe ancient structures, hills, mounds, standing stones, as remnants of giant civilizations. What stands out in all these traditions isn't just the size of the giants, but their purpose. They represent the old world, the world before humans claimed dominance. They symbolize the first inhabitants, the ancient beings defeated or replaced by newer tribes and cultures. And this raises a provocative question. What if the giant in Jack's story isn't just a monster, but a memory, a folk echo of a real people, taller, stronger, or simply older, whose legacy was swallowed by time, a memory reshaped into myth by those who came after? Before Jack, before the Beanstalk, before the story became a bedtime tale, giants may have been the symbol of a world long lost, and a world Jack dared to enter. Before we continue tracing Jack's footsteps into the ancient world, if you're enjoying this journey through forgotten history and myth, consider subscribing. It helps us uncover more stories that hide far older truths than we ever learned as children. Now, the true age of Jack and the Beanstalk is one of the most astonishing discoveries in modern folklore research. For centuries, scholars believed it was a medieval English tale, perhaps a few hundred years old at most, shaped and reshaped by storytellers around the hearth. But in 2016, researchers used an unexpected scientific method, the kind normally reserved for tracing biological evolution, to uncover something remarkable. By comparing dozens of variations of the tale across Europe and Asia, they treated stories the way biologists treat DNA. Each plot point, each character type, each symbol became a kind of genetic marker. As the researchers mapped these variations, patterns began to appear. Stories that were once thought to be unrelated suddenly revealed themselves as distant relatives, part of the same ancient family tree. And when all the threads were drawn together, they pointed to a single conclusion. The ancestor of Jack's story is at least 5,000 years old. That places its origins in the age of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, a prehistoric people who lived on the vast steppe between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. These were not city builders or scribes. They left behind no carved temples, no written myths, no grand monuments. Their world was the world of herders, travelers, and oral tradition. Yet despite the silence of their archaeological record, their language survived. And from that language, many of our modern tongues evolved: Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, Norse, Celtic, Germanic, and more. Within the tangled roots of these languages, scholars noticed something else: shared myths, shared symbols, shared story platforms. Among them was a tale of a young outsider who ventures into a forbidden realm guarded by a monstrous being, steals precious treasures, and escapes back to his own world. Across millennia, across entire civilizations, the details changed, but the heart of the story did not. What we call Jack today is just the latest storyteller's imprint on a myth that once traveled with migrating tribes, carried by memory alone through war, famine, and the rise and fall of empires. Somehow, against all odds, this ancient seed remained alive, growing, changing, taking new forms, until it finally reached us. A story older than writing, older than kingdoms, older than history itself. When researchers traced Jack's story back to the Proto-Indo-European world, something unexpected emerged. Jack was not unique. He belonged to a much older storytelling pattern, one that appears again and again across ancient civilizations. Scholars call it the cultural hero motif, the tale of a young outsider who dares to cross the boundary between the human world and a realm guarded by a powerful being, steals something extraordinary, and brings it back to humanity. This isn't just a folk pattern. It's one of the foundational structures of myth itself. In the Greek world, the clearest example is Prometheus. He climbs to the heavens, defies the gods, and steals fire, the sacred spark of civilization. His punishment is eternal, yet the world is forever changed because he brought back something divine. The shape of the story is strikingly familiar: a dangerous ascent, a guardian figure, a priceless treasure, and a return that rewrites the human world. In the Norse mythic cycle, the god Odin undertakes a similar journey. Disguised, determined, and utterly relentless, he travels into the land of the giants to steal the sacred mead of poetry, a drink that bestows wisdom and inspiration. Like Jack, Odin doesn't win through brute force, but through cunning, patience, and strategy. He infiltrates a place where he does not belong, retrieves a magical gift, and escapes with it back to the world below. Travel even further back in time, to the ancient Sumerians, and the story appears again in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The hero ventures into a forbidden cedar forest, defeats a monstrous guardian named Humbaba, and claims divine wood meant only for the gods. It is one of the earliest hero tales ever recorded, and it mirrors the same pattern: an outsider, a sacred space, a guardian, a struggle, and a return with something powerful. The parallels stretch across continents and cultures: the trickster who steals from the sky, the youth who challenges the boundary between mortal and divine, the wanderer who retrieves something magical and brings it back home. Whether it is fire, poetry, wood, or golden treasures, the essence is always the same. These stories aren't simply about theft, they're about transformation. Jack may wear the face of a simple farm boy in our modern versions, but at the core, he carries the DNA of these ancient cultural heroes. He is the one who climbs, who crosses the threshold, who steals from the powerful, and who returns from a place not meant for mortals. And that pattern prepares us for the strangest interpretation of all: a theory that turns the entire story inside out and asks whether Jack's climb was not into another world, but into the next one. There is one final theory, the strangest, the oldest feeling, and perhaps the most unsettling of all. It suggests that Jack's journey was never meant to be a physical climb into a land above the clouds, but a symbolic passage into another world, a journey not of the body, but of the soul. In many ancient cultures, beans were never just food. They were sacred, feared, or even forbidden. Among the Pythagoreans of ancient Greece, beans were believed to contain the souls of the dead. Their roots, slit like tiny human embryos, were said to resemble spirits pushing up through the soil. Even the gas they produced was interpreted as ghostly breath escaping the body. To eat a bean was, in some traditions, to consume a spirit. To plant one was to bury a soul. And for some, the bean plant itself was a living bridge between worlds. Seen through this lens, Jack's fateful trade becomes something symbolic. He exchanges the last living creature in his family's care, their cow, a symbol of nourishment and survival, for a handful of beans linked to death and rebirth. His mother's horror, her furious rejection of the beans, reflects the instinctive fear of crossing boundaries that should remain untouched. But then, during the night, the boundary opens anyway. The beanstalk rises, not like a plant, but like an axis mundi, a world tree, a vertical path into a realm beyond human reach. In Mayan cosmology, the Milky Way was seen as a celestial tree that souls traveled along after death. In Norse mythology, Yggdrasil connected the realm of humans, gods, and the dead. In Siberian shamanic traditions, the soul climbs a sacred pole or tree to leave the human world behind. Jack climbs, and at the summit he finds what many cultures describe as their myths of the afterlife, a guardian figure, strange treasures not meant for mortal hands, and a realm suspended between sky and spirit. The giant, in this interpretation, is not a villain, but a warden, a keeper of the threshold. Like Hades, Yama, or countless underworld guardians across world mythology, the treasures Jack takes, a single harp, a hen that lays golden eggs, are symbols of sustenance, inspiration, and eternal life. When Jack escapes, he does something decisive. He cuts the beanstalk. He severs the bridge between the living and the dead. The journey is complete. The soul returns. What remains is a story, one that carries, hidden beneath its leaves and magic beans, a memory of humanity's oldest questions. What lies beyond? Who guards it? And what do we bring back when we return? If you want to explore more hidden truths behind the world's oldest legends, consider subscribing. It helps us bring you deeper into the stories that shaped civilizations and still whisper to us today.